might seem crazy what I'm about to say. Sunshine, she's here, you can take a break. I'm a hot air balloon that could go to space. With the air, like I don't care, baby, by the way. Because I'm happy. Clap along if you feel like a room without a roof. Because I'm happy. Clap along if you feel like happiness is the truth. Because I'm happy. Clap along if you know what happiness is to you. Because I'm happy. Clap along if you feel like that's what you want to do.
Hi everyone, I think we've got everybody here now, so let's get started. Welcome to the webinar today on the heart of good instructional design. My name is Melinda Zanatich and I'm the Director of Format System Australia, as well as being the Master Trainer for Asia Pacific in the use of the format system. Before we begin today, I'd just like to ask you to get the most out of this session if you wouldn't mind doing a couple of things. Firstly of all, if you could just sort of turn off everything that's operating in the background, including any sort of email, Skype or those sorts of programs. But also, it's time to sort of silence your phone for the next hour or so, close the office door and just give yourself the time to focus on this information and discover how you can be a more effective trainer. So today I'm going to share with you the format system, a very brief overview of how it works. And you're going to learn a couple of things. Firstly of all, you're going to learn some strategies for how to improve your training as soon as the webinar is over, to be able to enhance outcomes for your learners, increase the return for your organisation, and overall just become a more effective trainer. And while I'm giving you an overview of the format system, at the end of the webinar, I will be providing you with some details on how you can learn how to use format in a much more in-depth way by attending our Mastering Train Design Level 1 program. We've also got a special offer for you for being part of today's webinar, and I'll talk to you a little bit more about that when we get to the end. So if you're like me, you might have experienced one or more of the following situations in regarding delivering training. So firstly of all, I think most of us have encountered a time where we might have been facilitating a training when you realised you're just not getting to everybody in the room. And that could be for a number of reasons, but you are up the front, you're doing your stuff, and you can just see that whatever your message is, it's not hitting the mark. Or you might have found that you've got a lot of content knowledge, but you weren't confident about the best way to deliver it. I have seen a number of presentations organised by people who aren't trainers, but who are subject matter experts. And the strategy there seems to be a bazillion PowerPoint slides. And while they know their stuff, the way they deliver it just means that if you're part of the group that's trying to learn this information, it just doesn't sink in. And finally, maybe you or your organisation have been looking for some sort of a consistent training platform that's research-based and guarantees results. I know many of the organisations that I tend to walk into have had often a number of people, subject matter experts, who come in and out of the training function. Each of those has brought something specific to the table, but it leaves behind a legacy of just mismatched programs. And once the person who's designed them goes, often then the material is almost inaccessible to anybody else to be able to train again. And so for me, I've found that format is the solution to all of these issues. Not only does it give you a training framework that can go beyond the learning and development function and impact into the whole organisation, but it can give you that wonderful consistent language for delivering training and development. So in the next 40 minutes or so, I'm going to give you a taste of the key elements that make up the format model. And this includes basically a look at the 4 types of learners that we identify using our particular focus. And also some of, obviously I can't in 40 minutes go into all of the brain research that's out there at the moment, but just some of it that forms the basis of the format model for instructional design. Before we launch into all of that though, I'd like to just give you a little bit of background about where we've come from, and I'm hoping that you find that our philosophy of learning aligns with yours. So in terms of thinking about learning from the format perspective, we believe firstly of all that people approach learning in very different ways. While we all like to learn and we're all capable of learning, the differences between how we actually approach learning can be quite profound. And the fact that there is actually a natural cycle that helps us to encompass these differences, and we will touch on that a little bit more later on. But the key to growth and to effective training, and then for effective learning for our participants, is to understand how this cycle actually works. Now, the model was originally built from looking at all of the research into learning styles. And while there were many different authors that were looked at, I guess the main things about the cycle hinge around 4 key researchers. I'm just going to touch on each of these in a little bit, just in case you're not familiar with them. So one of the first researchers that had a big influence on this model was Carl Jung and his theory of individuation. So basically he actually believed that there was a process that we go through that we come to understand who we are and how we are distinct from not only the world and the things that are in it, but also how we are distinct from other people. And so that is one of the key understandings, I guess, that our learning styles information hangs on. The second theorist is the work of Piaget and his constructivism theory. He basically talked about the fact that the way people produce knowledge and form meaning is based on their experiences in the world. John Dewey, the third theorist, looked at the whole notion with his transactional theory that there needs to be a balance between delivering knowledge and balancing the interests and experiences of the learner. So bringing that into the learning environment to actually help them build learning and knowledge for themselves. And then finally, probably one of the most influential theorists in putting this system together is the work of David Kolb. And he's probably the one that you're most familiar with. His experiential theory of learning, which was basically that learning is a process where knowledge is created through transforming of our own personal experiences. So as a result of these 4 researchers and many others in this field over many years, the format model was developed. And it sits around, I guess, 2 main axes when we look at the model itself. The first of those is that when all of the research was consolidated by Bernice McCarthy, the developer of this model, one of the things she found was that everybody talked about the fact that we like to get information in different ways. So some of us need to be more involved in the experience. We like to touch it, taste it, feel it, be it first before we can actually do anything with it. While others of us are actually quite conceptual. So we're quite happy to have someone show it to us. We're happy to read about it. We're happy to do some research. Google's been a godsend for those of us who like this particular mode of getting information. And we can process it all internally. So we don't actually need to do it ourselves. We can actually watch somebody else do it or read about somebody else doing it, and we can actually put the information together just as effectively as the person who's been directly involved. The other axis is what you do with that information once you've got it. And again, all of the researchers agreed that there's a continuum between watching and doing. Some of us, once we've got information, need time to reflect on it and to think more about it, whereas other of us just need to get in and do it and actually apply that learning for ourselves. And all of you will find that you have a preference for one of these ways of getting information and one of these ways of then using the information. So when you put these 2 axes together, you actually get the basis of the 4 areas of the format model. And the wonderful thing about this model that's always connected with me and with everybody that I've trained in using it is that it actually shows you in a very simple and structured way how to actually make the theory real and put it into practice. So if we think about the theory as the what of training or the what of learning, then I always think that the format is the how. It actually shows you how to put this into practice. So let's look at how this actually forms the learning styles information first. So you can see that there's 1, 2, 3 and 4 numbered around this cycle, and those axes, how you like to get information followed by how you like to use information, actually form the basis for determining each of the particular learning styles. So our type 1 learners are type 1s because they like to get their information in an active way, but then they need time to think about that to see how that makes sense to them. What they look for in terms of a learning environment is they need some sort of personal connection to the information. So they need to be personally involved in what's going on, and they need opportunity for them to both listen to and then share ideas. So they need a lot of time to talk through information that they're being given. They're fabulous observers of people and are really sensitive to the environment around them. So what you will find with these people is that they are very good at collaborating with others and working as a team. And the question that you'll hear them ask is the question why. If you are a type 1, the sorts of features or traits that you will see in somebody with a high type 1 preference: incredibly cooperative, very thoughtful, friendly and supportive. But of course, we all have strengths and weaknesses of anything. So some of the weaknesses for style 1s is that you can be seen by others to be quite soft-hearted, because you can quite often be willing to change your perspective on things if you can see that it's not going to go along with the rest of the group. The point in black at the bottom of this particular slide sort of really talks about your main Achilles heel. So the big deal for type 1s is that you tend to try and avoid conflict at all costs. They're great believers of being able to talk it all out and trying to resolve it without sort of upsetting people, because they really need harmony within their learning environment to operate most effectively. And you might already be thinking, I can hear some of these things are me. And I just wanted to say on that point that while I might be talking about each of these styles today as though they're quite discrete, I'm just deliberately doing that so that you can see which aspect of yourself sits within each of these particular styles. Obviously, in real life, this is completely not the case, and we are actually a combination of all of these particular elements. All right, on to learner type 2s. These guys are similar to the type 1s in that they need the opportunity to think about what they're learning, but they move to the other end of the getting information scale, which is the conceptualizing or thinking scale. These guys are very sedentary, I guess is the best way to describe their learning. They thrive in a traditional classroom because they're quite happy listening to somebody who's an expert in their content area, talking to them about it, and then they're happy to sit and think about it. So I guess maybe in some ways webinars are a nice type 2 learning strategy, because they're quite happy to absorb the information and then go on and use it themselves after they've had a chance to think about it. So what are these guys after in a learning situation? Well, they're looking for facts. They're looking for information, and they're looking for it as close to the experts in this field as they possibly can get. They learn by thinking through their ideas, and they're not quite as interested in people as they are in ideas and concepts. Very comfortable with a high level of detail. These guys collect a lot of data. I usually find that people with a strong type 2 preference have areas of interest that they study and read about for pleasure, just because they're really excited about learning something new. In the training room, you'll find that these people will be looking for your depth of knowledge as the trainer. They want to know you know your stuff. And they're often the people that if we don't give them enough theory or enough research or enough depth to the content, that they will be in touch afterwards asking you for more of that information. The question you'll hear them ask is what? What is this about? What is the latest in this information? What data do you have to prove that what you're saying is correct? Those are the sorts of things that you'll hear a type 2 ask. If you are a person with this particular learning preference, then you're strong in all of these areas. You use logic, you like information to be detailed and accurate, you're very comfortable with using data and being exposed to a lot of data. But again, that shadow side or the weaknesses, that reliance on data can lead to a lack of decisiveness, particularly if the data is leading you in a couple of different directions. Then twos really struggle. There can be an over-reliance on facts and figures, and I guess a little bit of a lack of focus on people. And you can see the Achilles heel for these guys, or their biggest challenge, is about the fact that they avoid involvement. They're quite capable of working on their own, getting their own stuff done. They don't really need a team to engage with to understand the task and to make it happen. So now we move over to the other end of the processing spectrum, and we have a look at our type 3 learners, which we refer to as the common sense learners. So again, they're quite conceptual. A lot of thinking goes on in their heads, just like the twos, but this time in terms of how they like to use the information, these guys need to be active. They need to be able to apply the information in the real world and use it, particularly for something practical. So for these guys, it's all about usability. If I need work health and safety training, then give it to me just before the work health and safety issue arises. Don't actually, draw me into a room 2 years before I'm going to need it, because to be honest, I'm just not going to remember. So these are the guys that the just-in-time training was developed for. They need to know how things work, and they like to learn by testing theories in a sensible way in the real world. So they like to be able to actually apply it as soon as possible after the training to actually check for themselves if they work. I sometimes think they probably, don't really believe anyone else until they've proven it for themselves that, yes, I can make this happen and I can see how it might work. The question that you'll hear this type of learner ask is how. How is this going to work? How am I going to make it happen? How many people have I got to help me with this? How many resources are online for it? How can we maybe get this happening the fastest way possible? Because these guys are deliverers. These ones are in training. They're always the ones who have finished first, and they've probably had a quick flick through whatever is coming up next when they're thinking about their learning preference. In terms of the traits you'll see for threes, they're incredibly efficient. They usually are managing multiple tasks at once and always seem to manage to get them in on time. So they're very task focused and have lots of accomplishments under their belt. But for them, their weaknesses can be how quickly they want everything to go through. So they sometimes don't honour the people or the process if they're really working through it at their own timeline. They can have a real bottom line orientation, which means other people can perceive them as being impatient and bossy when they want to take longer to get through things or to understand things. And their Achilles heel is the fact that they tend to avoid inaction. So they need to be on the go all the time, focused on doing something, producing something, making something happen. I wonder how many of you have already seen yourselves in almost all of these styles at this point in time. All right, so let's move on to the final group, our quadrant 4 type learners. Now we've returned to the experiencing end of the getting information continuum. So these guys again need to be in the experience just like the quadrant 1 people did. But again, they need to be active with using the information as well. So they are both active in getting information and then active in using information. But where they differ from the quadrant 3 style is that quadrant 3s are looking for the practical application of the knowledge, where your quadrant 4s are actually looking for adaptability and possibility. Where else can I take this? And for this reason, we refer to this group as the dynamic learners. So they're always looking for what else can I do with this information? They don't, like the type 2s, want to check how accurate it is. They don't want to know whether it's the most recent thing that's out there or whether it's substantiated by experts and research. If you're telling them that this is the way the world works, type 4s will generally go with that, but then they're sort of saying the next question is, well, what do I do with this now? And where else can this take me? So these are our big picture thinkers in terms of each of the styles. They like to look for things that are new and put information together in new ways. So they can be really comfortable with lots of change and even projects that involve high levels of risk, because for this style, risk isn't actually considered to be a failure. If they actually do something and it doesn't work, it then just takes one option on the table. And with this style, they've got another 4 options to give you after that, so it's not a challenge. They function best by being able to act and test their experience. And often I find in the training environment, these are the types that kind of come at you with a question that's just so out of the blue that it makes you wonder when you're the trainer, have they actually been paying attention to what I've been talking about? And they have, but the way their mind works is that they take huge leaps. And so they might start with something that you've said that triggers them off, and then they've kind of jumped off 4 or 5 topics past where you started. And that's where their thinking is going at the moment. The sorts of questions these guys will ask is the if question or what if. So I know we've done this like this all the time, but what if we just change this aspect? Would it make such a difference? If we change this, what do you think would happen? What might be the best way to, expand this, engage more people? They're always looking for that additional possibility. Again, if you personally are a high type 4, then you're probably pretty energetic. Your colleagues will definitely find you very thought-provoking because you'll always think of something that's sort of outside of the box. You're generally pretty outgoing and enthusiastic, but again, the things that you need to be aware of is that others might perceive that there's a lack of follow-through because you've just got one great idea after another. You're happy to go and do, something else if yesterday's idea doesn't sound as exciting anymore. The big Achilles heel for these guys is that they really need a lot of other people around them. They need to be able to talk their ideas out and bounce them off others. So often, if you find somebody that's in a training that doesn't appear to be paying attention, it'll often be a type 4. They'll actually be needing to talk to somebody near them about an idea that they just had, hopefully sparked by something interesting that you've said, but they will need to actually talk it out. They can't just sit there and write about it. They can't just sit there and think about it. They need others to help them out. So that's a brief overview of the various styles that form the basis of the format model. And as I've said throughout it, I'm sure by this stage that you've got a pretty good idea of which style is most like you. And you may even have a hunch about, the second area or even the third area that you kind of draw from. I'd also guess that you've probably spent a little bit of time thinking about colleagues that you work with. I pretty much guarantee that you've definitely thought about family members and going, where are they coming from? And wow, that sort of explains, this particular behaviour, which I've never really understood before. So our first day of the Mastering Training Design program goes into much more detail about all of these particular styles, including giving you an opportunity to take one of our learning assessments that'll really diagnose in much more detail your personal style. But we'll talk a little bit more about this at the end. So the other area that we mentioned at the beginning that forms the basis of one of the key ideas with the format model is the whole notion around the brain and its impact on learning. Now, there is a whole lot of research, as many of you I'm sure would know, into how the brain works. And pretty much I'd be confident to say that we've learnt more about the brain in the last 10 years than we did in the previous 100, just because of the advances in technology. And so while in this short period of time we've got together, I can't sort of cover all of that information. One of the key researchers in this field is the work of James Zull. And he basically acknowledges through his research into the actual physiology of the brain that while one of the main organisers, I guess, of the brain is the fact that we have a left and a right hemisphere, the other thing that research has told us recently is that there's also a major connection between the back and the front of the brain as well. So obviously neurons connecting up all across the brain, but there are some major pathways that travel both between left and right and between front and back. So most of day 2 of the Mastering Training Design looks at a whole lot of brain research and some of the newest stuff in this particular field. But basically, the reason why Azul is so important is that he's actually sort of taken the whole notion of learning styles and added another layer to it. And what he's basically said is that he can prove that the learning cycle that was originally put forward by David Kolb in his experiential learning theory actually is replicated in the main physiology of the brain. So if you actually think about it, through this process of this webinar today, your back cortex, which you can see in the image on the slide, has been lighting up because there's been some concrete experiences for you. Now, if you were in a training environment, this might actually involve you doing something. In this sort of instance, it means you've been listening to something, but there would be things that are lighting up in the back of your brain as I've been talking basically since I started. Then what would happen is your reflective brain would actually start to kick in. So as I've said various things, you would start to bring up memories. So it might be, oh, that's why my partner behaves like he does, or that's why I continually argue with this particular colleague in my workplace. But you might also be bringing up things like, that affirms what I know about the brain, or that fits with the learning style that I know, because there's many of them out there. That fits with the learning style I know. That sounds like this particular colour would go with this particular style. So you would be bringing all of that, and that's where the base of the brain, the temporal integrative cortex, would have been lighting up. As you've been putting those things together, what I've been saying with what you already know, you might have started to already think about, well, what does this mean in terms of what the format model might look like? You might have already seen the images of the model and gone, oh, now I've got a bit of an understanding about where this is going to go to next. And basically, when I show you the model in the next few slides, you'll actually have an opportunity to actively test that by looking at the slides, hearing what I'm saying, and you'll move into that premotor and motor cortex and go, okay, I got that bit right, I got that bit wrong. So all of us, particularly if we're effective learners, travel this cycle many, many times a day. And so the really exciting part for us as people who use format was that James Zull was actually able to prove physiologically that the theoretical model existed, which was really great. So what are we trying to say in terms of how the brain has helped what we talk about in format for design of training is that real learning actually follows a cycle, and that's replicated by the organisation of the major structures in the brain. So while some of us might have a preference for being in the experience, actually all of us need to have some sort of experience to actually help facilitate our learning. We all need to start from ourselves and from our own memories and experiences again of the particular situation that we're learning about. And we need a time to bring those to the surface and think about those before we actually hook them up to the content that we're learning about. So when you think about where we've gone today, where I've started with you was to get you to think about your own learning style and the sorts of issues that you've engaged with as a trainer in terms of trying to teach others. And then I've started giving you, by moving into the quadrant 2 area, some information about the research behind format and the way our particular model works. Once we do that, we can move into the next section of the cycle, which is the how part. So we can actually have a look at ways that we might be able to use this information. I'm sure many of you have started doing this already. How would you actually apply this? How will you use it in your work? How should this change or impact on how you currently design and deliver training? And then finally to that whole notion about actually applying it, putting it into practice in the real world. So what we're saying in terms of the format model is that if we plan our training around a cycle that answers the main questions that each learner asks, then we're structuring information in a way that follows the natural pathways that the brain uses for learning. So if we structure our learning around starting with why, from the learner's perspective, I might add, not from our perspective as a trainer, then moving into the what do we know in terms of the expert knowledge that we need to share, then we can move them into how might they use this, and then finally actually apply it and use it in their real working lives. So basically what we're saying is that while there are 4 different learning styles, they actually are only indicators of your particular preference for a cycle that is the learning process. So now, before I show you how you can learn more about all of this, I'd like to actually go through how you might be able to use some of this content that we've already talked about in this session today. So if we go back to the learning styles information, I think from all the work I've done with a variety of organisations, there are 3 main ways that I see this impacts very quickly in a learning situation, but also in a work context. So the first part is that if nothing else, this can actually help you improve your relationships both at work and at home. Just understanding the diversity of how we all like to get information and then what we need to do with information just gives us a better feel for those people that frustrate us the most initially, I guess. So if you're a type 2 and you like lots of details and facts and you like a lot of time to consider your response to something, and you've got a type 3 person who's come up and said, "Hi, Melinda, I really need an answer to this particular question," and as the type 2, you kind of sort of say, "Well, I'm really not happy to give you an answer about that now. I really need to think about it and I will get back to you tomorrow." And the type 3 says, No, Melinda, I need that answer right now." You can sort of see why they're not able to put the answer on the spot. For them, they have to process all of that request, do some research before they're comfortable with putting the answer there. And we can see how conflict might occur. So just thinking about, is that person more people-focused, more detailed-focused, more task-focused, or more big picture focused, might give you an understanding of why you talk about and explore the world around you of work and broader in different ways. The second way this can be really useful to you is to be able to support yourself better in a learning environment for yourself. And also to think about ways that you can stretch yourself maybe to take on a little bit more of the other styles. So, for example, I'll give you a benefit, I guess, that you need for your learning and also a stretch for each particular style. So if you're a note taker, you might want to just get the pen poised somewhere when you hear what you identified as your own personal preference coming up. So first of all, for type 1 learners, you thrive on learning through lots of discussion, group activities, and receiving realistic feedback. So in a learning setting, for you, it's really important to get yourself into part of a team. Whether that means that you can tee up just one other person in the class who you can meet up with on a regular basis to have a chat about the material you're learning about, or whether you form some sort of a study group with more than that. For you, that's going to be the key in terms of helping you to get the most out of your learning situation. The other thing for the stretch for you comes back to that whole notion of avoiding conflict that we talked about earlier, and that is try to develop an understanding now that you've got this learning styles information that some people actually require debate to challenge their thinking and actually get the best out of their learning. And so not to take that on as something that creates anxiety for you, but to recognise that's just how those two people interact. I don't necessarily need to be part of that if it makes me feel uncomfortable, but I'm not going to let it stop me from learning the information that I need to learn. For type 2 learners, if this is your preference, remember this was the detailed sequential people, you thrive on learning that's precise in all manner. Precise is in instructions, in timing, in information. You like data to be involved, you like it to be in a logical sequence. So you need that detailed information. But I think the thing that we need to realise if you're a 2 is that you need more detail than others do. And so if you're actually finding that it's not getting the level of detail that you need, you really need to talk to the trainer and ask for the additional reading material. Where did this come from? Those sorts of questions, or get in touch with them, post presentations to just get that extra detail that you need, recognising that maybe holding up the training at the time is not going to be effective for everybody. In terms of your particular challenge, it's exactly what I've just talked about. Don't get too bogged down in the detail and let that stop you from actually learning. Remember that you need more detail than others do, and sometimes it needs to move on, and you can actually, because you're so good at doing this yourself, you might actually get more benefit from doing some extra research following on from the training. Type 3 learners are the hands-on ones. So for you guys, and I'm sure you already do this, the key thing is to actually apply to do training that's relevant for you. You need to make sure that it's really going to be something that you apply quite quickly after you do the work. And so what you're going to be looking for is that whole application. I guess the other thing that goes without saying is that you're going to want to pick something that's really hands-on, because for you, that's your best way of learning. I guess the challenge for you is about stretching to work within a team, because you're so self-sufficient, you know what you need to do, and you're usually very quick at getting there, that sometimes the feeling is, if I've got to work with somebody else, this is just going to slow me down. But at times there can be benefit that those other styles bring to your learning that you will miss approaching it in the way you prefer. So try to interact with others and get some of those broader ideas before you launch off on finishing the task as a whole. And then finally, if you're a type 4 learning preference, so these were our big picture thinkers, your learning environment needs to be a lot of discussion, some acknowledgement of intuition, and the opportunity to go through a trial and error process. So one of the key things that you need to do, if someone hasn't provided it for you before they begin, is that big picture overview of what's coming, so you know where to hang all the details, because the details alone sometimes can be too overwhelming for you if this is your personal style. And that then also is your stretch. Your stretch is try and deal with some of the detail. Look for where your hunches about things and your experience about things can actually be supported by some detail and some data by other people that work in the field. So that's the second idea in terms of how you might use the learning style information. The third one is obviously why many of you would be here, I'm guessing, and that is that you would be able to better support each of these styles in your training environment, because every one of them will be sitting somewhere in the room at some stage in your training. And so for me, one of the quickest tips I think I can give you about this is by thinking about what sort of activities do you develop within your training that give opportunities for each of these styles to work in the way that they most prefer. So for type 1s, do you provide enough time for discussion? Do you give them an opportunity to talk with an important idea with somebody next to them, or form into small groups and share their own personal experience about a particular issue that you might be training on? For the type 2s, are you presenting information in a way that's detailed and logical and well sequenced, that includes enough theory or research or even just additional information that they can go and look for after the training to do the extra follow-up with? For type 3s, do you give them opportunities to practice using the information in a hands-on way? So if we're teaching you about a new software package that we've put in place in our organisation, for example, instead of just talking about it, are we actually getting them at some stage to sit in front of a computer and use the package for themselves? Because that's for these guys what they need. And then finally for the 4s, well, 4s love stories, so I would assume you would be putting in place a lot of stories that would help elaborate the points you're trying to make. But again, are there times where they've got the opportunity to think about the unique way that they might apply this learning into their workplace? So I hope there's something in there for you in terms of thinking about how you might just use the learning style information. As far as the brain information, well, for me, the key of that is the cycle which the whole format model sits upon. So quite simply, you can make some subtle changes to your current training that reflect this cycle at its this is at its highest level. In the training, we actually go into a bit more detail in terms of how each of these actually fits into a training design plan. But for the purposes of today, if you just actually started by answering those questions in the order that we presented them in to you today, you'll notice a big difference in your training. So for example, if you start your training off firstly of all by answering why does this learning matter from the perspective of your learners, not from the perspective that the organisation has said to us it's really important for you to all learn about this, so here you come and learn about it. It's more like, how do I as the trainer turn that around into why should this be also important for you as a member of this organisation? And I think if you find that, you're well on the way to getting personally people with that type 1 preference engaged. Then you can move on to your content. So then you actually do the training, you deliver it well, you deliver it in sequence, you do it in a logical order, thinking about all those things that type 2 learners like. Then when you get to the quadrant 3 space, that how question, you should provide time for practice. So some way of them getting into it and trying it for themselves. And then finally, you can finish that off by having a look at what is the real life application of this content. How am I going to train differently as a result of being in this webinar? What things am I going to pat myself on the back for and go, yay, that's working well, and now I understand why that's working well. And what might I tweak to see how it might impact what I'm doing in the training environment? I think if you have a look at that whole cycle, you can think about trainings that you've either delivered or been part of and recognise that a lot of training is focused on the what and the how. Sometimes, quite repetitively, this is what I know, this is how you use it, this is what I know, this is how you'd use it. And there's not so much of that top part of the cycle, the why part or the if part. And certainly I found when I first encountered this model, the introduction of that made a big difference to what I was doing when I was delivering training. So if I presented that cycle using some different words, what I would say is, in summary, is that you need to create a reason for why the learning matters in the mind of the learners. Then you can teach your content to them. So that's the stuff we already know and do well. But then you want to let them try it for themselves. And then finally, let them add their own value to it. So take their own particular slant and use it in their own lives. So what's next? Well, if you're interested in taking this to a whole other level, then as I mentioned at the beginning, I'd really like to invite you to our upcoming Mastering Training Design workshop. I just wanted to take you through a little bit of the content on each of the 3 days, so you've got an idea of what sort of things you'd be covering if you decided to attend. So on day 1, you would be looking at a in-depth personal learning style assessment. So you would definitely have confirmed what your particular style was, but also to see how much of each of the other styles are also part of your makeup. We would give you a little bit more information about the major theorists in terms of learning that supports the definition of the learning cycle. We'd elaborate on that learning cycle in a lot more detail, and we'd then take it at the end of the day to actually considering the implication for how does this shape how you deliver training and what does this mean for you when you're in the training environment. Day 2 is all about the brain. So again, we've got an assessment that helps you to understand your personal brain processing preference. And we spend a significant part of the day actually looking at the latest research on the brain and the impact that that has for learning. Finally, towards the end of the day, we look at the whole notion of understanding the importance of a concept or a big idea as a framework for your content. We haven't really talked a lot about that today, but certainly we'll cover that in the second day of the actual training program. And then by day 3, it's all about you. So on the beginning of day 3, we actually show you how all of those various theories form the model itself. We talk to you about the framework. You get to have a lot of practice with other workshops that have been written using the model. And then for most of the day on the third day, you get the opportunity to rework a current training or workshop, or even create a new one if you've got something that you're working on currently, with the support of a skilled facilitator helping you out in terms of tweaking it and looking at how well you're applying the actual model. So by the time you get to the end of the day, you should have an overview using the format model of how you're going to deliver your next piece of training. So if you want to improve your training, enhance your outcomes for learners, increase the return for your organisation, and find a consistent method of designing and then delivering training, then Format and the Mastering Training Design is definitely the program for you. Now, I did promise you at the beginning of the webinar that we had a special offer for you. So let's have a little look at what that actually involves. Now, normally we would only offer this as a full 3-day program. However, as a thank you for attending the webinar today, I've decided to offer you 2 different options. So the first option is that you can just come to day 1 if you're interested, or you can attend the whole 3 days. The choice is really completely up to you. So if you can see that you'd just like a day on learning styles, then you can come along to our Mastering Training Design program, just pay for the single day, and you can head off at the end of that. However, if during that day you decide that you would actually like to stay on for days 2 and 3, then for an additional investment, you can just roll that over into the full 3-day program. But again, if you just prefer that single day, we are actually offering you that at a special price, which you can see on your screen at the moment. Now, of course, if you do decide to come to the full 3 days, then you will get a further saving on that 1-day, possible 2-day extension model, saving around about $500 for the entire 3-day program. So to find out more, to have a look at testimonials and to reserve your seat, please go to trainingmastery.com.au/MTD. So it's up on your screen now, trainingmastery.com.au/MTD. That'll give you, as I said, testimonials, some more information, another overview of the 3 days of training if you missed it in the slideshow. And if you need to find out when the next program is running, you'll be able to see that also on this page. And if you're on our website at formatforlearning.com.au, you can find it there as well. So I wanted to thank you so much for joining me for this webinar. I really look forward to seeing you at the MTD program, either for a single day or for all 3. Now, if any of you still have any questions, please feel free to send me an email. I'm more than happy to reply to that, or even if you want to use the phone number that's on the screen at the moment, you can give us a call on that number to talk in more details about either the content of today or more about the Mastering Training Design program. I realise that many of you have got other commitments to get to, so I'm going to wrap this up now. Until next time, thank you so much for joining me and enjoy the rest of your day. Bye for now.